Welcome to today's webinar. So glad that you joined us. I'm Leo Sabo, and this is Rachel. And we're going to talk about the really important topic, how to reach the next generation. This is a topic that all of you have over the years, especially over our last forum, have told us you wanted to know more about. So we've been doing some research and really studying this over the last few months to try to figure out what kind of information can we share with you and how would this be helpful for your ministry as you're trying to reach this group of people. And so we found some information that was kind of startling and interesting. And as we do this, as we get started, let me go ahead and stop sharing our screen here so that you guys can see us. And one of the things that we found out was just some of the statistics that we never really knew were related to new people, to next generation. So as we get started, just wanting to welcome everybody. We are about a minute away, so I'm just going to chat for a minute while we get started, and then we'll go ahead and jump into this content. If you're here, we would love for you to interact with us. We're going to have the chat box open, so if you have questions, if you want to ask something, if you want to make a comment, feel free to do that. You can watch each other kind of do that as well, and we would love for you to interact that way, either through the chat or through the Q&A. Let's see. Actually, there's no chat, the Q&A. Just let us know if you have questions. We will share some of that, some of your feedback as we're going through this. Our presentation or our content, we're shooting for about 30 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have some Q&A time afterwards. And if we can answer those questions, we will. If we don't have answers, we'll go and get them and try to help answer some of those questions for you. But our goal today is really just to share some of the information we've been processing and help you understand how this might be, I believe, relevant to your ministries. So Rachel, why don't you say hi, and then we'll kind of jump in.
Well, hey everybody. If you don't know me, my name's Rachel Rupert, and I'm the ministry director here at CSN. And as you can tell, I'm a younger person. I qualify as a millennial. So it's just really exciting for me personally to be able to share and just act as a voice for people my age, because I think as the church is getting older, we need to bring in the next generation. And so I'm just really excited for what we have to share today. We did a lot of research. We did some polling of my friends and some older friends that I have. So we have lots of great information to share. And we're personally, I think, betting that some of this information is going to be new, and maybe it's something you haven't heard or didn't know before, because it was a little shocking to both of us. Yeah. So it's going to be really fun.
Yep. And I hope the information today that you'll take it, we really are not coming to you with a script of do this, do that, and you'll be okay, or you'll have success in this ministry of reaching this next generation. What we're hoping to do is give you some statistics, give you some perspectives that we've gained, and then you can take those as you're building this communication channel, as you're creating content to try to reach this group of people, which is so important. I know that as president of CSN, one of my most important things that I would like to do while I'm at CSN is to find a replacement for me at some point down the road. I'm not ready to go yet, but at some point, I don't want to get in the way of this message being just us who are in part of CSN right now. And I don't know if you guys have been aware, but we haven't attracted a lot of young people in the past. It's been guys my age and sometimes older than that. And that's not a bad thing, but we do need to pass this message on to the next generation, not just as a message of stewardship and generosity and discipleship, but also to the future leaders of this ministry. So we're going to approach this from, we want you to communicate to the people that are in your congregations around you that need to have this message permeate through their lives and be part of their discipleship process. But at the same time, some of those people will be called in ministry, just like you've been called into this ministry. And we hope that those people, because of the way they're being trained and discipled, will take up that mantle and then carry this ministry forward beyond my time and beyond some of your times. So we're excited about sharing this with you. I hope it's helpful to you. Thank you for being here. I do have the chat open, so welcome everybody. Donna, thank you for being here. We've got David Long, Chuck Franklin. So many of you have joined us, and we want to thank you. And by the way, if you are watching this a little later, because we will make this available for anyone that wants to watch it at a later time, thank you for taking the time to spend a little bit of time with us. Hope that this is helpful for you, and we hope it'll bless you and help you in your ministry reach.
Yep.
All right, let's go ahead and get started.
Before we get started,
Yep.
though, we do have a PDF that's available for you that's got some great notes on it. We've got some statistics, some graphs, some charts. So it's a really great resource that we put together, and we're going to be dropping it in the chat right now.
Got the one thing up. Excuse me. Here we go.
Yeah, we're about to drop the link in the chat, so make sure you download that. We'll also be sharing our PowerPoint slide, which is very similar. So make sure that you download that, and you can also follow along. We just wanted to make it easier so you don't feel like you have to take a lot of notes if you get some good nuggets in there.
Yep.
So.
Yep. And as I share my screen with you, one of the things that I can give you just a bit of a option is, if when this comes up, you'll also see our picture in there, a little window with the two of us. So you can drag that and move it along so that it doesn't block any of your content. I'm not sure where the best spot is. Probably the lower right corner might be the best spot. But if you do that, I think you'll be in good shape. All right, let's go ahead and share our screen again. We'll do it right here. There we go.
All right.
All right, wonderful. Let me start with us just talking about the perspective. The first thing we want to talk about is just understanding their perspective. This is the millennials and younger people. And really, when we're talking about this, we're going to focus a lot on millennials, but we're also going to talk about the next group, the Generation Z, that are now teenagers and entering into their 20s. And because this is going to be relevant for them as well. I think some of their unique characteristics will be slightly different, so we'll have to adapt. But right now, we're going to focus a lot on the millennials, but know that you can also use some of this information for the next generation as well. All right, so let's just start with the younger generation is saturated with information. That's one of the things that we all have to understand is this group grew up with information at their fingertips. There's never been a time where they didn't have access to Google and be able to ask any questions they want answers to. And that's good in some ways. It could also be, of course, a detriment in some ways, and we'll talk about that. But it is the first generation that's fluent in technology. I struggle with that. Some of you struggle with that. Rachel helps a lot with that. That's why I'm so grateful that she's on his team, because there are things that I don't even know exist that can make our ministry much more dynamic, easier to communicate. And she continues to be drawn to that information where I'm not even looking for it. So that's something you have to understand. The fluent technology that this new generation has is a benefit to us, and we need to harness that. But our approach has to be different than what we've done in the past. We need to accept the fact that we may not know everything and that they know things we don't. And some of that might rub us the wrong way because it's frustrating to us because we don't always know how to work with this technology. But understand that it's really a benefit. And yes, we can learn some things, but they're going to pick it up faster. They're going to use it to more to their benefit. And I think that's something we need to consider and incorporate as we're connecting with them, discipling them, and sharing this message of generosity and stewardship.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to the next generation and how the older generations deal with and know how to relate to them, you have to remember that their relationship with technology is it's going to be different than your mindset. It shapes our mindset so much differently. And as we've done the research and seen that, that's like the biggest difference between the older generation. But because we're so closely related to technology, there's things that the older generation has to offer that don't come as naturally. So, and we'll talk about that. But when you're shaping your ministry, you want to think about what you have to offer that we can't find on the web, that we can't find through social media, that will appeal to us more than the distractions that we have, because we are so full of distractions with all of the information that's constantly coming our way. We have to be able to meet the next generation and find ways to get through to that. And we have these questions on the slide. What can my ministry offer that the next generation can't find anywhere else? Because there's pieces that we're missing as the millennial generation that we need from the older generation, but I just think that the gap between those haven't been met. So there's stuff that we need that you have that we just haven't figured out how to communicate yet.
It's not, as you all know, it's not always a lack of information that prevents people from having success in this area. It's getting the information in the right way to be engaged with so that they can actually get through it. As many of you have done one-on-one counseling in the area of finances, and you realize that the problem, if it is financial, is very easily fixed. But it's really not a financial problem. It's a heart problem. And you have to work through that, and you have to understand how to connect with them. So in the same way, understand millennials have tons of information on this. And some of that is actually turned out really well for them. Some of the statistics we'll share will prove that they've actually taken advantage of the information. However, there's some very important key missing components to that they want more from, or to understand better. And that's where we come in. That's where our ministries come in and offer that additional support so that if the information can be applied, because the information alone will not get it done, right? Let's move on to the next thing, and that's understanding their challenges. Millennials have challenges that our previous generation didn't, or it wasn't as severe for us as it is for them. So Rachel's going to go through some of the statistics. There's a couple of different sources that we pulled from, and she'll share that, because I think some of this content will really surprise you. It certainly surprised me. I thought I understood where people were and the demographics and how people were spending money. And I was pleasantly surprised that millennials actually are better off than we thought they were.
Yeah. So a lot of this information has been pulled from different research that we've linked in the PDF document. It's not going to show here on the PowerPoint, but what we need to know is in the documents. You can go explore that later. Basically, the economy today is a lot more drastic than it has been for generations past, which means that millennials have a lot less room for mistakes and errors than previous generations. In some of the studies, which we'll go through, the cost of living is higher than it's ever been. And that's not just like looking at the dollar amount, it's actually with inflation taken into account, it's increased a lot higher than the wages, than the past, and then the wages can keep up with today. And because higher education has become almost mandatory to any job, there's a lot of financial pressure to get a degree, and then we're coping with the higher prices, which we'll go into. I'm just going to go ahead and skip ahead to these statistics. So you'll see that since the 1960s, the home value has gone up by 73%. Rent costs have gone up by 46% since the 60s, and we only have a 67% increase in wages. Now, like I said about the higher education becoming almost mandatory for a well-paying job, the price of education has gone up exponentially. With public college at this for this graph, public college, it was the equivalent of $3,190 for annual tuition for public college. Today, that is almost $10,000 per year. So that's what we're paying. That's a 213% increase in price. Also with private college, tuition costs $15,000 equivalent in today's dollars from the 80s, and now it's at about $35,000 per year. So this is like a cost that we really can't get around, but we're still having to make those payments. And then you'll see too with the home cost. So this graph shows that in the 60s, the price of a home was $11,000, which is about $100,000 in today's dollars. From 2000, from the year 2000, it's $170,000 in today's dollars. And now in 2018, the average cost of a home is $210,000, which is great for the national average. But I'll tell you that in DFW, the prices are a lot higher. And as we were talking about this, we were talking of, for me, I'm married, I have kids, and my husband and I have been saving money religiously since we got married, and we're still kind of hesitant to pull the trigger because the cost of a home, a decent home in this area, is about $300,000 or more, and that's a steep cost, especially when you have young kids. And I'm mostly stay-at-home mom, working part-time, and I can share about some of my friends. When it comes to the millennial generation, a lot of us kind of pick and choose what we want to go for because we can't have everything at once. So for me and my husband, we chose to start a family first. So we're living in a small 2-bedroom duplex that is a little bit cramped and a little hard for us to fit us all in there, but we would rather be in a tight space than choose to take out a mortgage right now when it's very expensive here. And I also have friends who have chosen to pay off student loans and they're in their 30s and have not had a family yet because their priority is taking care of their student loan debt. So
yeah, so some of millennials have put off marriage altogether because they want to pay down their debt, they want to secure their finances, their careers, and so they've put that off. Some have gotten married but have put on having children. All of this has been driven by their ability to manage the financial side of this.
Yeah.
And this is really important to understand, that they actually haven't tried to do everything. They didn't have the family and the house. The majority of them have very strategically chosen one path or the other because they've looked at it. And I think because of so much information available, they've looked at it, they've gotten some education, obviously through the resources that are available every day. And they've realized, well, I can't do that yet. So I'm going to wait, or I'm going to do this, but I'm going to skip out on that. And I think that's important to understand. These are challenging times for them, because I know when I got married, I was married 4 years before I had my first home, but I was 24 years old when I bought my first home. And it wasn't a huge stretch for me to get into a home. And today, if you look at the cost of how much a house is, and that being, of course, the largest percentage of usually everyone's budget, it's the largest percentage that it takes. It's much harder to get into a home and have children, and it almost always means two incomes. So it's really difficult, because once they get married and start having children, if they have a home, the wife has to stay working.
Well,
and that's difficult
because daycare is expensive too.
Exactly.
So I mean, there's a lot of different financial situations for millennials when it comes to whether it's postponing a family, postponing a home for the sake of having a family, or even in some cases, friends who have purchased a home, but they have to go to their parents to get help with property taxes and things like that, because it's just the cost of living is just a lot for us. And we were talking the other day about how he's gotten to benefit from the rise in the market price because he owns the property. But for people like me who have not purchased a home, we're seeing this inflation in the value of homes, but we're having to deal with purchasing that, not getting to get the what's the word, like
the increase in equity, right? So I gained equity because I had a home prior to this increase. They've missed out on the increase, and now the increase has made that house so much harder, or whatever it is, whatever inflation is affected. Whether in educational as well. Education for me was much cheaper than what it was to send these guys to school, as all of you have probably experienced that. So these are important factors to understand. But the takeaway here is that they've had challenges, and that's important to understand because they're looking for answers. They want to know, how can we do this? I want to have a home, but I also have student loans. I want to have a family, but I also have a home, and I'm not sure that I can do both. How do we walk this generation through understanding and reaching a place of contentment, no matter where they are? Because the reality is, we never want to reach more than what we can, because that creates financial stress, creates marital problems, all kinds of things. So it's so instrumental that we come in and give them a perspective where they can find contentment no matter where they are, right? Even if they can't quite yet have a home. If they're in a smaller place, but they have their home, their apartment, but they have their family, that's a good thing. So we can come alongside and encourage and help them to live by biblical principles that will keep them safe. And then eventually, as the Lord increases them, they're able then to step into the next season.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about some of the strengths that we've seen.
Do you want to see if there's any questions? Just so long.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I don't know if you can get rid of that page, but I'll keep talking while you're doing that.
Well, let's see. I don't have any Q&A. If you guys have any questions, feel free to start asking those at any time.
Yeah, we'll be keeping an eye.
And we'll keep an eye on that, and we're happy to answer some of those if you do have questions.
Okay. So, like I said earlier, as we were preparing for this, I really wanted to get some information from people that I knew. So I put together a survey that I sent out on my social media. We got a really good response, I would say.
60 people or so.
Yeah, which is
within a couple of days.
Yeah. So it was really great. It was basically just getting very basic a financial picture of kind of where they were, get their age. So in this survey, basically what we found out was that millennials were doing really well compared with other generations, which we'll get into the whole stereotype about millennials and how we were like super entitled and whiny and all that stuff. But the financial picture, millennials had a lot less widespread debts than the 35 and up crowd, which basically means I asked them, which kinds of debts do you have? Do you have credit card, mortgage, car payments, student loans, etc.? And most of the millennials had only one or two different debts at one time. And out of that, it was very, very rare for anyone under 35 to actually have credit card debt. And the ones that I did see that had credit card debt were mostly single females. So it's not as common as it is with the older crowd, who a lot of them actually did have credit card debt and car payments and student loans. So it was kind of, so there was a lot of different types of debt that they were dealing with. And what was really surprising was that a lot of the 35 and under crowd had a pretty high savings. They had mostly over 10,000, but actually a pretty good handful had over 25,000 saved in their savings account, which compared with the 35 and up crowd, they had considerably less instances of a high savings account. And the ones that didn't have it, it was like very polar opposite. There would be a few that have really high and some that had little to no savings. So millennials actually did very well. And in the PDF too, there's a survey that Bank of America did as well, that it showed the same results, which is the millennials are doing pretty well.
Yeah, and that was really surprising to us. And someone asked the question and said, is this due to delayed expenses of a family, house, etc.? And we believe it is. Again, this is new to us somewhat, because we started doing this research, trying to figure out where are they, how do we best address the actual need that's there. And we were surprised that their saving was higher than we thought it was. I honestly would have thought it would have been less than 5,000 right across the board. So I was shocked to see how many had 25 or more. And then to see that actually Gen Xers over 35 were less likely to have savings. And I think it's because they have the home, they have the lifestyle, and maybe more expenses that are taking up more of their income, and potentially have not allowed them to save as aggressively. So I do believe the answer to the question, is this due to the delaying things? Yes. I believe millennials have just assumed that they can't do everything. Some of them, I'm sure, have made mistakes and have gotten in too deep. But overall, from the survey from Bank of America, plus the survey we've done, the informal, it's proven that millennials are more aware and have chosen not to go too deep. And that's, I'm generally speaking, I'm sure you've known some that have made some big mistakes, as of course our generation has done, I have done, but I was really pleasantly surprised to see that they were in better financial shape, however, still struggling to make life work, because they are missing out on some things that they really desire, and yet they don't know how to do it.
And we got a few more questions. So Doug, with the asking about whether or not the younger ones had children or not, I would say most of the younger ones, I didn't ask who specifically it was, so I couldn't tell you if they had children or not, but there was a lot of the women that filled it out that were over 35 actually did not have children. So I would say it was pretty even with the age groups of whether they had children or not. I know some did have children, so I think it's a pretty good balance. Let's see, what did Jim say? You mentioned.
Let me read this. So Jim said, you mentioned that millennials have student debt, car payments, daycare, and housing that is expensive. So how do you get them to realize that stewardship and giving and God should come first and not be an afterthought?
I feel like that has to do with our next slide.
We're definitely going to talk about that, because one of the things that obviously the reason we started doing this and motivation for all of this is that we would impart these biblical principles, right? We operate by that, so we want to pass that on, and that's what we're all about. And we feel like at some point, if there isn't an answer, there's going to be a big divide between how millennials live and even their satisfaction in life. My concern is that some of these financial struggles may actually impact their relationship, their ability to have or not have. Whoops, our camera just went out. Sorry about that. Their ability to either have or not have a family. I think more and more people will just opt not to have a family and maybe just have pets instead of children because they're cheaper. So my concern is that we need to teach them, because it will help them to have more rounded lives, and of course have that life built on the things that we value, and that's generosity, good stewardship, and kingdom mindedness.
Do you want to get to the next slide, which basically we talked about. From these studies, we found out that really millennials are a very great audience for stewardship ministry because they are very financially aware and they're very interested in getting financial education.
Right.
There's a huge benefit to the millennial group that maybe you haven't considered before, which is that we are a very fluid and a very adaptable group. We're always looking for what's the best way to do it, how can we do the best job, because we are feeling these challenges in real time. And especially when it comes to pressure to put off a family, which I know my friends who've waited, it's not that they don't want kids, they do, but they want to make sure that they're not struggling. They want their kids to be happy. They want to be able to provide for them. So there's definitely a motive for us to pursue financial education, which that just tells us that this is really where we should be hitting it with stewardship ministry. We should be going after this group. And just like, was it Jim? Yeah. What Jim was saying is that it's important for us to communicate the heart of stewardship, but we can come at them with the practical information. And back to the study that I did, the survey, a lot of the people had great savings, but they weren't actually tracking their expenses in a budget. So that means—
That's a good point, because even though financially it looked like they were doing pretty well, and yet there wasn't I would say a majority of them did not have an actual written budget, because we asked, do you have—
how do you track your expenses? And most of them either didn't, or they just looked at their bank account, which we know that means they're not really budgeting. So that's where your poll will be, is to get them through the door with some really practical tools that they can implement in their life to help them. And then communicating the heart of generosity. Once you establish that trust with them, then and biblical stewardship, then we can really start to move them towards biblical stewardship. And
so it's attacking the area where they're most interested in, and that's the practical journey, the getting the advice, the getting the mentoring, because they are seeking that, but at the same time realizing that we know the real answer to these situations isn't just more money or better savings or whatever. It's about getting their hearts aligned with what God called them to do, really discipleship in this area of finances, such a key role in their lives, and they're seeking answers. So that's a really good thing. I'm very excited to learn that and to know that they're open to that. But my goal is always not to just provide them the practical, but to help them understand where's God's heart into this, and how does that relate to your real life calling and purpose for your family and your life. So I think we have the interest, and we could use that as a doorway, but then obviously lay down the real reason for this. And that's part of any type of ministry you do. Most people will come to us because they're financially in a place where they need either information or help or support. And we know that giving them the nuts and bolts of it is not going to cure the problem. And that's where we have the opportunity to go deeper. So I'm excited about that. Let's talk about the communication. How do we actually communicate with the next generation? And this is something that's really important, because we need to understand that who they are and why do they think or act or behave the way they do. Sometimes as an older guy, I look at younger people, and honestly, if I didn't have millennial kids and I was in a good relationship with them, I probably would have some skewed perspectives, and some of it I've kind of bought into at some point. But I recognize that there are some things we'll share with you that have been said or believed about millennials that frankly just doesn't pan out to be true. Just the opposite actually is true. And there are some things that we thought are weaknesses are actually strengths. And that's something that we want you to be aware of as you're approaching and communicating with them.
Yeah. So one of the most important things for my generation is that we don't want to be treated inferior. When we were looking into this, first of all, millennials are constantly the butt of jokes, like always. There's the video about sponsor a millennial, but fund their Starbucks cravings, fund their Spotify account, and all of that, the subscriptions and everything. But those are really just judgments that are not factual at all. The research backs up the fact that we're very driven, we're very passionate, and we're very motivated to succeed in life, to love people authentically, which we'll talk about.
Yep.
But we just don't get the respect, I feel, that we're not that we're owed, but it just feels like we've already been kind of discounted. And I was at church a couple weeks ago, and I go to Gateway, and Pastor Robert Morris, he said something that really stood out to me, and it was about the verse in 1 Timothy 5:1-2, which says, "Do not rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and with all propriety, the younger women as sisters." And what he was saying was that the younger generation, they look up to the older generation as mothers and fathers, but the older generation doesn't treat us as brothers and sisters. They look down on us. And there's a lot of tension in the church with the younger generation and the older generation, because we're not being treated the way that the Bible actually tells us to be treated. Yep. And to be seen for our strengths and what we have to offer, which we have a lot more to offer at this age than I would say previous generations did, because we have the ability to deal with technology that the older crowd does not have. So we do have strengths that are not considered. And so we want to be treated with respect. And
well, let me just add one more thing here. What Rachel's trying to say is they want to be treated with respect, but we're not saying that if they're doing something wrong, we don't need to call them out on it. That has nothing to do with this. It's the approach of our communication. And if we think about how Jesus dealt with everyone he interacted with, he never ridiculed or put anyone down. Now, he was harsh on the Pharisees because they were being fakes, they were being disingenuous, they were being critical of other people. And Jesus loved people, so he said, you're the spiritual leaders, and yet you're talking to these people like they need to clean themselves up before you even give them any notice. And I think that's where we have to be careful, because between the mainstream media and some of the liberal views that are out there, millennials are having to be caught between, am I listening to my conservative parents who are critical, or will I listen to the liberals who seem to at least not judge me? And I don't want to, this is not about politics, it's about communication. We need to honor and respect people. Jesus would not approve if we came to the table and said, well, they're all messed up, I guess we'll have to do something about it. No, our responsibility is to lovingly communicate truth. And I'm never going to water down the word of God and say it's okay to do something that's obviously God said it's not. But at the same time, I think it's really important that we fight extra hard, that we are intentional about speaking lovingly, that we speak with respect. And it's not about deserving. Every person deserves to be respected. Now, if somebody messes up, we need to call them out on it. And if they make mistakes, we need to be honest with them. We can't coddle them. I don't think they want it, honestly. I know I didn't. Tell me what's wrong, and then tell me how to fix it. And I think that's what they're seeking. But there has been, unfortunately, an overwhelming agreement, even if not an attack, an agreement, even by the Christian culture, to say, yeah, that's the millennials, and we kind of shake our head. Yeah. And I think it needs to stop. If we're going to have an impact in helping them to understand these biblical principles and have them embrace them and live them out, we need to make sure that we have an open communication that's never going to be hindered because of an attitude that just doesn't need to be there. So I hope you agree with that, because I think it's something we need to work on.
Well, and I want to add to that too, not to get into politics, it's not about politics, but you have to look at my generation and see that there's an obvious identity crisis that's going on. And I personally think that there is a lack of spiritual mothers and fathers in the church today, because we're being judged and we're being condemned for these identity crises that are going on, when what our generation really needs is we need people who are going to build relationship with us, love us unconditionally, and that we can trust, that are not going to come and accuse us of not doing not for being in sin or not doing what we're supposed to do. Like, we don't need that. I think that our generation is very, very aware. Yeah. And
well, let's talk about something here. One of the things that we learned, and I think all of you would know this generation is more sensitive. And I say me, my generation, raised them that way. We wanted them to be okay with, hey, if a man needs to cry, it's okay. A man needs to say, I love you to their son or their daughter. Whereas my generation and previously my father's generation, they didn't do that kind of stuff. Emotions were just not well managed. So we wanted to overcome that problem by instilling these emotional intelligence into our children. And by doing so, they become more sensitive. They become more aware of how they feel and how their interaction with others is going to work out. So it's more upfront for them than it is for us. And that's important to understand, because sometimes we think, well, because they're sensitive, then they're weaker, they're less responsible, they're more entitled, they get offended much sooner or easier. And actually, that's not necessarily true. What we've been able to determine and see is that the sensitivity actually increases their empathy and compassion. And these are traits that we want in believers. These are traits that we want in the church. So I believe it's actually a strength for people for this generation, that they have sensitivity, that they are emotionally intelligent. But we need to understand that also has a downside for us if we're not communicating correctly, because they're looking for authentic communication. They're looking for people who are genuine. One of the things that so surprised me in how media, especially the video format of media, has progressed is how little production you need to put into any kind of content you're producing. Some of the most successful people out there have literally no equipment. They got a phone in their hands, but they're communing their heart, and there are thousands of people following them. Why? Why are they following their life? Because they're looking for authentic, like you said, Ray, they're looking for mothers and fathers that will mentor them, that will walk alongside and answer some of these difficult questions. And I think it's such a great opportunity, because they do have a desire to grow. Remember, they have information. They don't lack that. They need to know, how do I apply this? And how does this information actually get lived out? And what if I'm running into barriers like inflation so high I can't afford a home? What should I do? Someone like me can come in with my experience in my life journey, so to speak, and speak wisdom into that, and help them kind of talk them off the ledge and say, you know what? It's okay. God loves you where you are. God can provide for you. And it's okay to reach for the point where someday you'll be able to afford a home. But for now, make your apartment your home and enjoy and be content and do the things that are actually going to bring happiness. And that's being involved, helping others, living out your calling, rather than just getting the bigger house, as many of my generation pursued and realized bigger house wasn't the answer. So we have an opportunity here to actually engage them at a heart level and to help them live out their calling much sooner than maybe my generation did, because we tried the material, lifestyle. And when it didn't pan out, then we had to be like, okay, now we have to fix the mess we made and then take off the mantle to live our purpose. And I think we're in a position where we can help them avoid a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think too, the pressure of where our whole life is on display. Every one of our friends, we are living in feedback mode all the time. And while that's awesome, one of the downsides to that is that we see only the highlights. And so we see a friend who has a home and we think, well, they're the same age as me. They're kind of making what I'm making. We do almost the same thing. And so we only see the positives, but we don't see the real hard truth to what it takes to own a home. So I think that kind of almost will cripple us if we try to pursue what we see our friends doing without knowing the truth. And that's where the relationship comes in. Because for me, if I didn't have this guy telling me well, here's what really goes into it. There's property taxes, there's this, there's the down payment, there's closing costs, there's blah, blah, blah. Don't do it. I probably would have tried it, because a lot of my friends have nice homes and I want that, but I also don't want to take a financial risk that it's going to destroy me. So that's where we need the relationship. Yeah,
because that information, you realize that some of the information that's coming across to millennials as they are engaged with information all the time think about who's actually offering financial education today. That's why I'm a big proponent that the church should be the primary source of financial education, because we are not going to tell people to buy a house just simply because they can afford it. It would be a decision that they would need to make in cooperation with the Spirit of God and with the purpose and calling that they have. Whereas Bank of America is just going to want to give them a loan, and they're going to qualify them or overqualify them based on whatever the criteria they pick. And so the mistakes that they can potentially make or have made, we can come along and provide that wisdom, provide that coaching. But in that communication, again, the first thing we need to be aware of is make sure that we show that proper respect, understand that they have a desire to grow. They truly do have a desire to grow, and they're seeking for it and they're longing for it. But they also want it from authentic, respectful resources, people they trust. And I think that's us. I think we can come alongside and provide this generation of believers and task them with continue to build the kingdom of God in the church. Otherwise, my concern is, and we didn't talk about this at all, but the statistics show that millennials are exiting the church and certainly giving a lot less to the church than any other generation. And that should tell us something. Should tell us that something's not right, and we need to engage them in that conversation. Now, someone asked earlier about what type of content curriculum is available out there. Honestly, if there was content and curriculum out there, we would already have shared that with you, and we'd have told you, here's how you help this group of folks. Unfortunately, there's just not a lot out there. There are some content developed by Dave Ramsey, the Crown and Compass Ministries has done some, but again, some of the statistics and some of the information we're sharing with you may or may not be included in the approach of how this information is offered. So my recommendation to you is, one, start creating some content. We all need it. So if you create something, we'll promote it and we'll get it out there so others can use it. We're going to work on some of this, and we encourage you to start building this information that is from a biblical perspective to this new group of people. The other things I would say is take into account how they receive information, and the fact that they're not the kind of people that are just going to sit in a 1-hour session while you're at the front as a professor speaking to them. They need to be engaged. They need to ask questions. They have the information. They need to decipher what it means, and then they need the biblical perspective to increase the impact of it so that it actually solves the problems they're trying to solve.
Yeah, and in the survey that I did, I'll tell you that nobody my age, under 35, put anything other than they wanted to learn by face-to-face connections, by relationships, mentoring. That's what my generation is hungry for, because that's not something that we really can find anywhere else. The church has a really, that's the mission of the church, is to disciple people, but our generation is missing out on those relationships. And that's something that's why mentoring is so important to us. It's a big, we just want to be seen. We want to be accepted. We want to be poured into, because we are hungry to grow.
Right. All right. So let me stop my presentation here, because I want to, go to some of your questions. So let's just see here.
I would say, so would you say similar findings apply for Gen Z? I would say even more so. I mean, I don't know about financially, but I know as far as their need for relationship, it's definitely so high. I think that the Gen Z generation is so lonely. They're so lonely. Yeah.
Let's see. So we answered that. There was another question here, or I'm not sure if it's a question or a thought. Yeah, it's a question. So at the end it said, this is from Jim. Do you know the level of generosity with the millennials? Yeah, there are some studies out there, none that we've done on the generosity, and actually it was done, I think it was the Lake Institute for Philanthropy did it, the Lilly School of Philanthropy, they did a study, I think it was last year, and it was very extensive, and I think PushPay's done some studies. We can find some of those and link them, but ultimately what we saw was that a majority of giving to church today is given by Gen X and actually baby boomers and the greatest generation. So we're talking people that are over 57 years old and older. And
what percentage were you saying it was?
80%.
Yeah.
80% of the funding to the church. Now, this is not in every congregation, just generally speaking across America. And this was based on a study of all giving across all charities, right? So there was $400 and some billion that was given in 2019, I think the study was. And out of that money, 32% went to the church. Now that's in contrast to almost 50% in the 1970s. So it's steadily declined. But when you break it down and look and say, well, who's actually giving out of these demographics and different generations, you really are looking at baby boomers still, by a large majority, supporting the church funding. Millennials were 60% of them gave on a regular basis, but only 7% gave to churches.
Yeah.
That was startling to me. That really, really concerns me, because that says that they don't see the work of the church and the work of Christ in the church as relevant or necessary. They think they can do that other ways. And again, they're very giving. In fact, they're more giving than my generation.
Mhm.
They're more giving than the Gen X generation. However, the idea of tithing hasn't really been taught very well in the church. Some churches do a great job, as many of you know, some churches don't. And now when you're coming to them and saying you need to give 10% of your income, oh, and by the way, not understanding their financial struggles, that they can't quite reach for that home, they're having to put off their family.
Mhm.
Well, again, you're giving them do this without giving them the understanding of why.
Well, not only that too, but when we're coming to church and we feel like we're not being poured into, or that we're like the invisible age group. I mean, I go to a mega church. There's a lot of people my age, but you don't see them because there's nothing that's really targeted for the millennial age group. Because the mega churches they're already up and coming. The pastors are older. So there's not a lot that we feel personally invested in. And I know many people who feel the same way, that it's a struggle to find our place and our purpose in the church. So asking us to commit financially when we feel like there's really nothing that we're benefiting from, like we don't feel seen, it's a lot to ask.
Mm-hmm. So Lauren asked, where does God's word play a role in this? How do you think we can creatively communicate, but then communicate biblically? I think that's actually the deciding or the difference that we bring into this conversation, is that we're not just another voice with information on finances. We're not another financial expert that's saying, follow me, I'll show you how to do this and how to get rich.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to approach this completely different. We're going to talk about the meaning of money, what it means in their lives, or why it's such a struggle,
Mm-hmm.
or why it's something that we need to truly understand from a heart and a spiritual perspective, rather than just from a financial, practical perspective. And this is where the Word of God comes in. You see, if you guys follow some of the content that we develop, it's always from, what does the Bible say about this? Like we're not just going to tell you giving is up or giving is down, and here's some strategy. Strategy is wonderful, and I think we need to use every tool available at our disposal. But at the same time, we need to always anchor that to the Word of God, because that's the truth that every generation needs, and that's the only thing that we can really fully base it on. Because everything else will kind of fall apart, right? If somebody comes in and offers them a bunch of information that's helpful for the moment, but doesn't really give them life answers. Like I said, we pursued materialism. My generation pursued materialism, bigger houses, bigger cars, more stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get into our 60s and we have no purpose. And that's the problem with focusing just on the practical. So we need to bring in the biblical perspective and anchor what we teach on the Word of God, because that will stand.
Yeah, we want to transform hearts, not just help fix problems,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what's going to last longer. If we can transform the hearts of the next generation, then the church will be funded. That's not the issue. It starts within.
Mm-hmm. All right. So if you guys have more questions, we'd love to entertain those. I'm not sure if we missed any here. I'll go through. Yeah, there was a chat that we want to make sure we're not missing that. Kind of hard to keep track of both, but we'll do our best here. All right, some of you guys are offering some information there, so that's great. Generosity Gap, some content, very good. Barna Group had a great oldest study. Yeah, one of the things that I want to just encourage all of us is just continue to study this. Don't take just what we've said and say, well, that must be true about every person always. No, realize that people are unique in their own ways, and we need to constantly be learning and adapting our communication to make sure that we are coming across lovingly but truthfully, and that we're really offering true help. We've always said that it's better to teach someone to fish rather than giving them a fish. This is the same thing to us, right? It's about helping them understand the truth rather than just giving them quick answers that really will eventually not lead them to the results that they need and the result that God wants them to have. So again, we're grateful for what we've learned. We hope that this information was helpful to you. And if nothing else, again, we didn't give you any scripted answers because we honestly don't have them. We don't have an exact script on how do you do this. But I think as you consider the communication that you'll have with this group of people, that you'll think about how to interact with them in a way that hopefully, if you are aware of what they need and how they communicate, it'll just make you better at actually having the communication. But I'm going to tell you, you're going to learn a lot of things as we're continuing to learn. And that's just part of the process. And as you learn, adapt, ask questions. One thing that I have to consistently do, I'm a learner and I love to go deep and become an expert on a subject. And when I've done that work, I feel like I know enough to be able to tell you exactly what you need to do. I need to resist that. Honestly, I need to resist that. I need to ask more questions, give less scripted answers, because this generation especially has those direct answers. But as we know, they're not providing the kind of help and support that they need to grow as stewards and disciples of Jesus. So we want to make sure that we're communicating to them in a way that appeals to them and that draws out the questions so that we actually are making a connection.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that excites us so much about this is that this generation is so ripe for harvest. Like the finances are there, the hunger is there. It's just we're waiting for somebody to come and cultivate what gifts and what's within us so that they can become just really generous. And because our generation is so passionate, I think if you can really invest in some people, they're going to spread the message far and wide. You're not going to have to do all the work yourself, but it's just giving them the time, giving them the energy. And like relationship is so important. You can't, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have like been desperate to get to know somebody who would be willing to just invest time in me. And that's not unique to me. That is a cry of our generation because it's something that's missing. So I just think I'm just excited to see if we can get the message out by just pouring into this generation. I think the church is going to be in better shape than it has been in a very long time. And it's going to be the revival that we really need.
Yeah. Agreed. A couple more questions that came in. Greg asked, what are, excuse me, let's see. What are the best approach for delivery? Classes, Q&A time, one-on-one coaching, other. And I think, again, knowing what we know about how they receive information is to realize that it's not necessarily the information itself that matters so much. It should be biblical and it should be concise. But I think the delivery is really, really crucial. And what we've learned is that they want to be able to not just don't give them scripted answers. What that means is small group environments where it's not a lesson that you're delivering and they're just sitting receiving, but just throw some questions out there. Interaction. It's got to be hugely interactive. Even if it's an app, for instance, our friends at Crossroads and Willow Creek have just created an app called Freed Up. And they created this app so that people could do it on their phone. And I love that because I know that the generation that's going to go to that is the generation we're talking about. So we need to continue to do those kind of projects and curriculum development where it's drawing them in. But I do understand that they are constantly connected through their phone in community, but that community isn't the kind of community that they're really seeking. Because as Rachel said, they're seeing a highlight reel of people's lives. What they need to see is life on life,
real
sitting
struggles.
across. Because those are going to, for one, it's going to give them the ability to understand something we all need to understand as we're going through this process, is that we're not alone, that we didn't mess up beyond repair. And that needs to happen on one-on-one because it's not going to happen on social media and it's not going to happen any other way. So I do believe it has to be small group kind of environment in homes, but more relaxed than what I grew up with as small group curriculum, where it's just, ask this question, answer this question, go around, let's pray. That's good stuff. And I think for some people, it's still the vehicle. For my group, I can accept that and receive that and I can benefit from it. I think if Rachel were to go through that kind of study, it wouldn't be as beneficial for her because she wouldn't have a chance to really engage at the same level that she has a desire to do. And that's where millennials are. So we need to provide both the information, but just make sure it's interactive. One thing I started doing probably about 10 years ago is to stop just delivering messages. In any class that I've done, including our Financial Hope Workshop, which we developed over years, was to always have a teaching time, an interactive time, a practical application time. I think that should be part of any, whoops, we just lost the camera again. There we go. I don't know why it keeps going out. I think that should be part of any person's delivery message is that you incorporate some kind of discussion, some kind of time to reflect and actually, that's one of the best things that you can do is say, let's take 2 minutes and just what is God speaking to you? And then let's share it with each other and make smaller groups so that people can be open and not be afraid to speak in a larger group. So I do believe that the community, close-knit community is important, but I also think the one-on-one is important as well. I also do a little bit of side work with a podcast with one of my friends, Pastor David Thompson, and we did a beta group, a budgeting course earlier this year. And I can tell you, every single person that signed up for this course, we had 5 families go through it. Every single one of them fit in this generation's category. And that just tells you they're hungry for it, but they wanted the interaction. They were getting the information through our podcast, through some of the things we're developing, but they wanted to interact with us and say, show me how to do this. And that just, again, it reaffirms the fact that they are willing to have and want to have that connection.
Yeah.
Okay, someone says you mentioned content like Dave Ramsey and Compass or other members of CSN have prepared programs. Again, these are programs that you can find on either one of those websites. Some of our CSN members have created individual classes. The problem with it is it may be working for their church, but we have very little in the curriculum space specifically for generosity and stewardship that's national, or it's been produced in such a way that it could be sold and made available to all churches. And that's my plea to you, is that your church or your ministry or whatever you're heading of, that you invest some time and resources to develop those, but don't develop them just for your church. I think we need to start thinking more globally as a church. If I create something, I want to make sure it's good for any church, no matter what the size is. So I guess that's a little bit of a call to action. Yeah. It's like develop some stuff. We're going to work our way to try to do some of that as well. But we as an organization, we're more focused on drawing the attention of senior leaders and then equipping stewardship leaders to lead in the space. Not so much on content development. We do feel like we could do that, but our primary role is to share the message of stewardship and generosity to leadership and then train them. You guys are in the trenches. You need to be developing this stuff, and then let's collaborate so that you can get that out to more churches. Let's see, it could involve many things: budgeting, investing, paying off debt, home buying. Absolutely. Get as practical as you need to, because I do believe that this generation needs to understand how the spiritual connects to the practical. So, we had one of the sessions we had at the forum was on investing, and I was talking to Matt Bell, who taught that session, and he said, there's just not enough taught on investing in the church from a biblical view. And I said, Matt, I agree. I said, we need to have more practical teachings on how to manage money, and then draw the word of God and say, look, the word of God agrees with this. So definitely do that. I agree with you, Jim. I think we need to use the practical to get to the heart, to get to the spiritual. All right, I think we are out of time and questions. So thank you so much. I really do hope this was helpful for you. If nothing else, to open your eyes to some of the statistics that we've learned that we wanted to share with you. And maybe just consider some of the questions that were in this presentation. You'll get the PDF, of course, and you can use that. Feel free to do some of your own research. And if you come across something that the whole network can benefit, send it our way. We'll find a way to incorporate in some of the content, or some of the content we're releasing, and we'll share with everybody so we can all learn together and get better at this. All right?
And if just in case you didn't get the notes, we'll send a follow-up email with the PowerPoint and the notes for you. So don't stress trying to look for it. We'll make sure you get a copy of that. Yeah,
and if you want to come back and view any of the things we've talked about, feel free to do that as well, and share it with someone. Share with another stewardship leader that wasn't able to be part of this, and let them know, hey, this conversation might be helpful, might give you some insight that would be helpful for you. So again, thank you so much for being with us. Please join us for our next webinar. It will be in a few weeks, and we're going to do more of these so that we can come to you and offer some resources and some insight and some inspiration so that you can continue to do the work that God's called you to do. We are grateful for you. We thank you for your time, and we hope the rest of your day is blessed and productive, and the rest of your week as well. God bless.
Bye.